Hi, good morning, everyone. Yes, good to see you all. My name's Nate. I'm an anaesthetist who's just got back from Zambia, actually. Yeah, it's been great to hear from Dylan all the different things that GADP has been doing. And I can certainly say firsthand it's been exciting to be part of that. And it's my pleasure to be able to introduce the next speakers. And this is from the Ethiopia Anesthetic Development Program. And I wanted to introduce Dr. Fatia Al-Farid, who's an associate professor in the Department of Anesthesiology, Critical Care and Pain Medicine. She's done a master's in public health and is a fellow of health science education. In addition, she's been an executive committee member for the Ethiopian Anesthesiologists Professional Associations. And she's helped deliver multiple courses, including Lifebox Safe OR, the Safe Pediatric course, and the VAST course to various different MDT teams in Ethiopia. She's delivered VAST Foundation year training for junior residents for 1 year, and subsequently she's been posted as the head of simulation in her institution. So that's Dr. Fatia, who will be, there'll be a presentation from first, and this will be followed by Dr. Usman Tariq and Dr. Christopher Stone. Usman and Chris are both ST6 trainees from North Central London, from the North Central London Deanery. They are working as education fellows during their respective out-of-program experiences at the Black Lion Hospital in the anesthesia department in Addis Ababa. So we look forward to hearing from these guys. If there are any questions, they will be free to take questions afterwards. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Fatia Al-Farid, Assistant Professor at the Department of Anesthesiology, Critical Care and Pain Medicine at the Anbassa Specialized Teaching Hospital, Addis Ababa University, Ethiopia. And today I'll be sharing Muri Mountains, my challenge and benefits of delivering simulation training in Ethiopia. Stay with me. So the outline of my presentation, for those of you who've never visited Ethiopia, I will briefly describe Ethiopia and the Anbassa Specialized Hospital, and then talk about the inception of simulation in my department, and the most important thing, the challenge and benefits of simulation training. So Ethiopia is a landlocked country in the Horn of Africa. It is also one of the only African countries that has never been colonized. We have our own alphabetics, and we also have our own numerical system, and we're also known as the 30 months of sunshine. Addis Ababa is the capital and largest city with a population over 2 million, and estimated population of Ethiopia, according to World Odometers 2021, is over 122 million. If you want to visit Ethiopia, then we have a spectacular view at the Semei Mountain National Park, which is the largest national park in Ethiopia, and it's also the highest place in Ethiopia. And here we also have here also you have Lalibela Church, which is one of the 7 wonders of the world, and it's excavated from a single rock. So if you have an architectural interest, then this is a site to visit. The Anbassa Specialized Teaching Hospital was established in 1964 Gregorian calendar by Emperor Haile Selassie, who as the only site for trained medical doctors. But in 1998, it was incorporated as part of the Addis Ababa University Teaching Hospital for both preclinical and clinical training. And most of the subspecialty training actually is initiated at Black Lion, and most of the disciplines is originated in Black Lion or the Anbassa Specialized Teaching Hospital, like the cardiac anesthesia, cardiac surgery, vascular surgery, and the like. And it's the largest referral hospital in the country with over 700 beds. Department of Anesthesiology was established in 1919 by Dr. Straightfield, an Australian anesthesiologist, and the department has struggled. It started with only 4 residents, but it has struggled in recruiting residents for many years. There was no resident, and a maximum of 5 residents were there until 2014, where the number of residents drastically increased, and currently we have 90 residents. We're responsible for managing complicated and difficult cases that are referred from all over the country. We have 19 OR tables with all the subspecialties and class procedural sedation and ICU. Currently, we have 15 staff, for which majority are general anesthesiologists, 2 are cardiothoracic anesthesiologists, and 1 pediatric anesthesiologist. And there's another individual on training for pediatric anesthesia in Kenya. The Simulation Center was actually established 7 years ago by the university for all preclinical and clinical teaching activities. However, most of the department uses a place for transfer of skill and delivering of lecture, and this is also true in our department. There was a small data that was collected at the Simulation Center, even though it's not published. There were 30 participants, and 20 were among the 30 participants were physicians, and they say that 63% of the participants say that they had moderate level of experience when it comes to simulation, and 60% say they use the Simulation Center once or twice per month, which is very small compared to the center. How the simulation began in our department. The first simulation experience we had was in 2016 when the faculty members went to Washington University Simulation Center to visit. And even though it was a 2 weeks week observership, we only had 2-day program at the same center. And we were able to observe conduction of simulation there. However, we had a little clue as to how the scenarios were written and how the scenarios were conducted, and it was a high fidelity center, so we couldn't imagine how we can implement those things in our setup. And even with all these difficulties, the department envisioned to start simulation in the coming years with the help of Seattle Alliance Outreach. And one attempt that was implemented was a 3-day program for final year residents, where a scenario was written by the staff members and with the help of Dr. Richard Sulazi, who is a retired anesthesiologist from Seattle. And it was a successful implementation of simulation. Other than that, there was no attempt on planning or delivering simulation in the department until VAST appeared in 2019, and the department mainly focused within the Simulation Center as a site for skill station in the examination and delivering of lectures. As you can see, these are the ways central line being taught and ultrasound guide nerve block being taught. These were the only means we use the Simulation Center in our department. So what is VAST? VAST is a vital anesthesia simulation training limited company, which was registered as a charity and not-for-profit commission by Australian authorities. It has a different courses, the VAST facilitator course, VAST instructor course, and the VAST foundation course. And the two courses, facilitator course and instructor courses, can be delivered for higher clinicians, including senior consultants. And the VAST foundation course has 9 modules, and each module has a different weeks. And I'm mainly involved in delivering this VAST course for 1 year. And the most important thing about this VAST course, it uses a low fidelity, so it's very important to implement in a resource-limited centers like ours. So VAST was actually first introduced in 2019 as a activity for faculty members, and the second VAST was delivered the next year in order to increase the number of staff trained for simulation. However, because of COVID and other factors, simulation did not begin in our department until 2022. And CASE fellows coming to touch were mainly involved in delivering the VAST simulation to residents with some support from faculty. This actually even happened in 2019 with faculty members from CASE. These were the VAST training that was being delivered by at different times. The other experience I had with simulation was Impact Africa, which was a TOT simulation trainer of the trainee simulation training course for a multidisciplinary team that consists of anesthesiologists, pediatricians, and obstetricians. And these physicians came from different parts of the country, including the northern part, the southern part, and the center, Addis Ababa. It was an intense 6-day course, and it used a hybrid method, a mixture of low and high fidelity method to deliver simulations. And as this simulation was very good in its effectiveness, because at the end of the 6-day course, the participants were able to deliver and conduct simulation, and they were also able to write their own script, their own scenarios. This was Dr. Bantayo, the cardiothoracic anesthesiologist from USA, who helped bring this project to reality. And this is a picture from Impact Africa TOT training that we used. So coming to the most important part of this presentation, was the challenge of delivering simulation. There are a lot of challenges in delivering simulation, which includes overall running the scenario and doing debriefing and equipment related. And I'm going to go through them each by one by one. So when you talk about running the simulation in general, as you know, there is overburdened faculty members with clinical work, and they're very small in numbers. Like you can imagine, there's only 15 of us, and we have to cover 19 ORs plus pre-anesthesia clinic, procedural sedation room, and ICUs. And we are also responsible for another facility called Menelik Hospital, Tertiary Hospital, where we're responsible for pediatrics and ICU. So the number of staff we have, plus clinical work and academic, was very difficult to find any senior that could be assigned in delivering simulation. And the second challenge was, even out of the 15 of us, only 5 of us are trained on delivering simulation, and the others feel a little bit uncomfortable in participating in simulation, which made it difficult for the department to initiate a regular basis of training using simulation. Luckily, I was on a sabbatical leave, and with the help of CASAFE team, I was able to deliver simulation twice a week for a year. And the second challenge we had was residents that were chosen for simulation were the junior staff, and that meant they were new to anesthesia and they were new to simulation. So buying it was a little bit difficult. As I've mentioned earlier, there was no seniors that are being assigned for helping deliver the simulations. So that meant I had to use the residents to play a role in the scenario. And some of the residents were a little bit too timid and shy and had less interaction, and others were overactive and even overplaying their role, which ended up changing the scenario's main learning objectives. And the other difficulty was I had to run the simulation alone unless there is a CASAFE team that could help with the facilitation. So that means I had to use senior residents and helping co-facilitate the scenarios. And one of the issues with this was they had little to some experience with simulation. So sometimes they overacted and sometimes they forgot their role, which was a co-facilitator, and stayed acting like a lead participant. So in order to avoid such kinds of errors for the future, what I tried to do was to run the scenario ahead of time before I ran it for the junior staff, so that the senior residents can get familiar with the role they had to play. Debriefing, the number of residents per session was large, like there were 11 to 13, and the VAST Foundation year was actually devised for a maximum of 7 participants. So over a 1 hour period, that meant having certain residents doubled the time it took to finish one session. And it was also sometimes very difficult to focus on the learning objectives of each session, because there were many clinical errors that occurs during the scenario that required micro-teaching, which meant expanding the time it takes for the simulation. English language, even though it's a primary language for teaching in medical education, some of them, the residents found us very uncomfortable using it during simulation. So we started using Amharic English, which is a local mixture of Amharic and English language, which is Amharic is a local language. The other issue I had was we're only delivering VASTA simulation-based training in our institution. That meant only junior staff gets the most benefit, and the senior residents and the second-year residents will not get any much of benefit out of it. And the skills and knowledge learned that the simulation doesn't always correlate the application in the OR. This is also important because, for instance, when you ask a resident at simulation center about pre-oxygenation, they would apply it and use it, and they had a perfect knowledge about it. But when it comes to clinical application to their patient, they lagged a lot behind it. Equipment purposes, although the SIM center and the department was found within the same hospital, they were found in a different building. And most of the equipment I used for simulation were a property of the Department of Anesthesia. So I had to move most of this equipment ahead of time in order to deliver the sessions. And it was a little bit cumbersome. So the solution we found to this was donating the equipment in the name of the department to the SIM center, so that would be easier for us to access it the next time. And so some of the supplies had to come from the department, but some of the were difficult to access, like an ultrasound, because the department didn't have an ultrasound. So that means eliminating some of the topics that needed to be covered. The center is a low fidelity center. The SIM center is a low fidelity center with a capacity to change to a high fidelity center. So there are a lot of benefits to delivering education using simulation, which we know. But some of the most important thing we found in our center was, though it was a low fidelity, it gave residents a structured learning and covered most of the basic topics of anesthesia, because VAST Foundation year has its own pre-reading material, interactive discussions, and scenario on a single topic, which enhanced the memory for residents. And most of the scenarios can be done with a minimum requirement of equipment. Residents found it to be a safe place to learn and make mistakes as well. and it augmented the current anesthesia curriculum, and simulation was being run twice a week on a regular basis and has been the only strong and consistent means of teaching in the department for the junior staffs, for the junior residents. And help from CASIF in delivering the simulation meant faculty can focus on other aspects of academics, and Simulation Center provides adequate space for delivering simulation, which meant we didn't have to worry about where and how to deliver this session. So in general, VAST foundation year has been and should be part of the curriculum of the Department of Anesthesia, which we will work in the future. But this is how we were able to deliver it. If you have any questions, you are welcome. The floor is open for discussion.
So I think we'll move straight on to Chris and Usman's presentation, and then we can take questions for all three afterwards, if that's okay.
Mike.
Good morning, and thank you for listening to our short presentation on simulation training for anesthesiologists in Ethiopia. The talk is somewhat facetiously titled Moving Mountains, which is not meant to cause any offense to anybody here in Ethiopia, but rather sets the scene for our experience of delivering this style of learning within a low resource setting. At the very least, it gives me the opportunity to show off one of my holiday snaps, which for those of you who are unfamiliar with the amazing landscape here, this was taken whilst hiking in the Simien Mountains of northern Ethiopia. To start with introductions, my name is Christopher, and I am taking a year out from anaesthetic training to work as one of the local education fellows here at the Tika Anbessa Hospital, also known as the Black Lion Hospital in Addis Ababa. I've been here since February, and my rotation finishes after 6 months in July.
Hi, I'm Usman. I'm also taking a year out from training to work here as a local education fellow. My background is in anaesthetics and intensive care training. Chris and I are both in our 6th year of training. We are working for a combination of charities, including the EADP and CASIF, the Canadian Anaesthesia International Education Development Foundation. And I mention this because the bulk of the simulation training we are delivering is contained within the vast curriculum, which was partly designed by CASIF. We will elaborate more on this shortly. We will just briefly acknowledge our third local presenter, Fetia Al-Farid, who is a senior anesthesiologist at Tika Anbessa, and I know she will also be giving her own presentation about her experiences this morning.
It wouldn't be possible to talk about simulation training here at the Black Lion without first mentioning VAST. Vital anesthesia simulation training was first piloted in Rwanda in 2018 in collaboration with CASIF, as well as other groups such as the World Federation Society of Anesthesiologists. It was designed to allow delivery of simulation-based core knowledge within low-resource settings, and the online platform is managed, supported, and updated by a dedicated team who are based in various places around the world. The vast curriculum currently forms the bulk of what Usman and I teach to first-year residents. Topics start from basic anesthetic patient assessment, including history, airway, and pre-optimization of the sick patient, to conduct of anesthesia, maternal collapse, and pediatrics, as well as other common emergencies. Each week is dedicated to a new problem within a range of topics. For example, 1 week could be laryngospasm within a series of pediatric sessions. VAST provide a lesson plan for us, and the residents are given access to the learners section of the online platform where they can access pre-course reading in the form of relevant journal articles or textbook references. The sessions are usually divided in two, firstly with a group discussion about relevant basic science, followed by a 10-minute scenario, and finally an in-depth debrief, which lasts for around 30 minutes. As well as teaching the core topics, there's a strong emphasis on anaesthetists' non-technical skills. Importantly, it's also encouraged that there is local facilitator involvement, which is where Dr. Fetia is involved with the VAST program. The picture on the right shows the simulation room in the education center at the Black Lion Hospital, which we're lucky to have access to. It's low fidelity and suitable props and equipment are often scarce, but it's a nice, large space with plenty of light, and there's a very helpful and dedicated simulation technician called Bailu, who I feel deserves a special mention here.
From our perspective, and I think I can speak for both myself and Chris here, the project feels both to have a reasonable level of sustainability and impact, which is a big factor that helps to motivate us. This style of teaching also allows us to connect with the residents in a slightly more relaxed and entertaining way compared with their traditional teaching. This gives us room to address NTS, team working, ethical dilemmas, and conflict management. For example, last week we addressed how to challenge a senior surgeon while working under pressure during a difficult induction of a patient that required resuscitation. We feel that by moving away from the traditional didactic approach to teaching, the hierarchy is broken down enough to empower the residents to ask more questions and hopefully share more of their experiences. This also helps to open up opportunities for mentorship as well as the teaching of core information. This is because the open discussion that occurs during debrief can promote the exchange of shared anecdotes, feelings, and experiences from both us, the faculty, and the residents.
We've been trying to collect as much anonymous feedback as possible, and before making this presentation, I asked the second year residents who've been receiving simulation training for over a year now to share their thoughts. All the respondents said that they felt that the simulation training was extremely useful to their practice. All said that they preferred simulation training over traditional lectures and found them more useful. All said that they felt significantly more confident managing real-life situations following their simulation training. And all respondents were keen to continue more simulation training in the future. Some other general comments included things such as, I never had this kind of teaching method in my undergraduate study, which I wish I had. This brings me to the photo on this slide. Many of us are used to a variety of teaching modalities other than independent study and traditional seminars. However, even relatively simple techniques such as breaking the class size into smaller groups and encouraging discussions seem to have a positive impact upon the experience of the residents. Some other comments that were fed back to us were, it really helps me to grasp the idea of practical medicine before applying my knowledge on real scenarios. And it is useful, it improves our skill of communication and also build up our knowledge, and please continue. From speaking to local junior and senior doctors here, I think it's fair to say that very little medical education is performed in a practical way, and that even goes for resuscitation training. The core learning objectives are aimed at a basic level, but for the residents, this is usually their first ever experience with simulation training of any kind, and there is a huge scope for both technical and non-technical learning.
So, bringing us back to the slightly tongue-in-cheek title of this talk, some of the challenges that we have experienced so far include: firstly, whilst we are lucky to have dedicated simulation room and of course Bailu, who helps us where possible with most equipment related issues, simulation training is of course relatively resource heavy. We have 30 residents in each year group and are currently trying to teach VAST to both the year 1 and the year 2 residents. So as you can see from the photo on this slide, even in a group of 15, which is clearly too many, that's 4 2-hour sessions per week. Also, access to protected teaching time is very difficult, especially for years 2 and 3, and there are frequently last-minute clashes or changes in the schedule which we may not have planned for. Part of this problem can probably be explained by lasting disruption from the COVID-19 pandemic, a very overstretched workload for the senior anesthesiologists in the department, and even the recent conflict in Ethiopia, which has resulted, unfortunately, in a lack of visiting fellows. Having said that, there is a newly appointed postgraduate lead for education, Dr. Jonathan, who is keen to solve these kind of issues and help liaise us with his colleagues in a constructive way. This really helps us facilitate these sessions better.
One of the other challenges arises from our vast inexperience with Ethiopian culture and sometimes throws up interesting dilemmas. For example, when running a simulation session on maternal collapse and encouraging a discussion on perimortem cesarean section, I noticed some very blank faces and my colleague, Dr. Fetia, laughing at me, at which point she had to explain that no one in their right mind would dare to do a timely perimortem C-section here. The reasons why are for another discussion, but the point is that whilst these are both important and interesting topics to teach, you can easily and unexpectedly find yourself wading into highly sensitive issues. So learning to adapt quickly and keep an open mind are key requirements to running successful sessions. Another challenge can be misreading emotions such as anxiety and fear, which the Ethiopian residents hide extremely well indeed. Of course, there's a risk to psychological safety in simulation, and so we try hard to be as supportive and non-judgmental as possible. We dress up and act a bit silly in the sim if indicated, and hopefully this all helps to break down some of the anxiety for them. On that note, I should say that we have to be mindful not to confuse the residents either. In a less formal teaching environment, it can be tempting to slip into using sarcastic humor or other typically British characteristics, which can be confusing for them.
As we have mentioned, acknowledging feedback is something that we are trying to do well. And this photo is an example of us listening by delivering adult life support training for the novice residents after they requested it.
So in conclusion, simulation training has taken us quite a while to get going and sometimes a high input of energy to sustain. As well as dealing with the organizational and cultural challenges on both ends, which we have mentioned. However, it's proving to be a beneficial source of education for the current residents, as well as highly rewarding for us to be a part of. We hope you enjoyed this presentation and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. That was really great to see. So I believe we've got Dr. Fetia and Dr. Usman and Dr. Chris with us right now. Is that correct? Hello.
Yes.
Great to see and hear you guys. So we've got a bit of an opportunity for people to ask questions now on those great presentations that we had. So either feel free, there's different ways to do it. Either you can raise your hand to ask a question, or you can place it in the webinar chat and I'll be able to read those out and ask these guys. Or there's also the Q&A function, which I think we can see, but not necessarily everybody else can see what questions go in there. So yeah, I just wanted to give an opportunity for anyone to ask any questions. In the meantime, I think I wanted to ask, I mean, having come back from Zambia, and we were trying to do a similar thing in terms of set up some more simulation training. Granted, we didn't sort of use the VAST course, though we did look at it, and it looked like a fantastic resource. I'm interested in terms of like low fidelity and what that kind of looked like for you, because I know there's a lot of evidence to suggest that even low fidelity simulation is extremely beneficial from an education point of view, and there are certain things that can make low fidelity still feel very realistic, and for me that's just having a monitor that just changes the SATs tone. That for me is the one thing. If I've got that, it feels like a real thing as the O2 SATs drop if I'm not doing a particularly good job. So just from you guys, what sort of does low fidelity kind of look like then in the setting there in Ethiopia? I haven't actually said who I've asked that question to, so I'll leave it to you guys to decide who you want to.
I guess perhaps it's easier for us if we can compare it to what we're using in the UK. I mean, the mannequins have no technology, and they're not remotely controlled by anybody else. You're absolutely right. The thing that really helps us is having an iPad where we can remotely control the SATs and the heart rate, and we can even simulate blood pressure and an arterial line if we need to. You're also right that it's really like teaching the framework of decision making, teamwork, and you can quite easily put residents under pressure by giving them a scenario which they feel is in a way that's unfamiliar to them. So as I said, they don't, from my understanding, Dr. Fetia can correct me if I'm wrong, they get very, very little simulation training outside of what they're doing here, and most of them will have had almost no simulation training before, and we all know how that makes one feel when you're suddenly put under pressure. So the combination, I think, of that, them being watched by us and also by their colleagues, is probably enough. And as you quite rightly say, the evidence is that low fidelity simulation is perfectly adequate.
Yeah, Dr. Fateh, is there anything you want to add to that at all?
Yes. I think one of the things we should consider is, like, there are high fidelity centers, by the way, even in Ethiopia. For instance, in Mekelle and Bahar Dar, they have the high fidelity center, but we don't have it at Black Line. But none of the departments in this hospital actually do the simulation kind of things. Even though we have a simulation center, people don't do it. So it's always nice to start somewhere, and having a low fidelity system where you can actually apply. By the way, like what Chris suggested, we have an iPhone tablet where we can manipulate with a SIM app, we can manipulate the vital signs. And there's a lot of role playing that is required from the participants to make it a little bit more realistic. So that's one of the challenges we had whenever the residents don't play into their parts. It's because it's a low fidelity. Sometimes there are things that are forgotten to be said. But VAST is nice because, you know, it has everything that you need to say, and you don't even have to worry about how to act or what to say. I think this helps a little bit more. So if you don't have anything, starting with a low fidelity is better. And the other things, there are a lot of studies suggesting that high fidelity versus low fidelity, there is not significant difference when it comes to education. So we're using what we have. I think I've answered your questions.
No, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, we've got a question that's just come into the chat from Helen. So she's just said that when we were in Zambia, that we found it tricky to kind of get residents away from theatres and their clinical demands to do simulation during the day. So how did you guys find, or how are you guys finding this particular challenge, or is it not a challenge for you in Ethiopia?
It was definitely. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, you can start.
From our perspective, it was definitely a massive challenge because they're very busy in theatre. The senior residents in particular, you know, they have a lot of responsibility, and there's 30 in each year. So it took us a lot of weeks and a lot of conversations with Dr. Fetia and Dr. Jonathan to finally, only a couple of weeks ago, get some protected teaching time, and that has been a godsend. So for the first years, they're novices, so we got all Thursday with them, and no one expects them to be in theatre because they're supernumerary. For the second and third years, we had to compromise. We've only got one afternoon with each of them a week, so Tuesdays for the second years and Wednesdays for the third years. And we're only taking them, about half of them, out of theatre per week. So we've divided them into two groups. We get 15 of them away on a Tuesday and then 15 of them away on a Wednesday. And then they can alternate week by week. So that way we can get some of them, at least it's better than nothing, while still having enough of them available to deliver the service. But it has definitely taken time and a lot of patience and a lot of conversations.
Yeah.
Maybe to add some points. So honestly speaking, because like I said, we have to cover about 21 ORs, and there's a little staff that can cover everything. So we mainly depend on final year residents on doing the clinical work as well. So it's very tough to take the final year residents out of the OR and take them to the simulation. But there is a common understanding within the department that we're not doing a lot for the academics. And I think last year there was a discussion within the department when simulation came into picture, and with the help of CASEP, the department agreed that simulation could be the only means to advance their academics. So we decided we will have twice a week a session for the residents. But to be honest, I think it's because mainly out of 15 of us, I think 6 or 7 of us were involved in VAST training, and we knew how helpful it was. And because of that, everyone was a little bit committed in making sure that the VAST could be delivered for the residents. And having that understanding might have helped us to have a schedule. But to be honest, for juniors residents, it's much more easier because they're not that much involved in clinical work. So it's easy to take them off. But for final years and second year residents, it's still a struggle. And in the department, we still have arguments and discussion in how we can take them off clinical work. And I think this year it was possible, and we will see how it goes. But we've decided to make sure that they will have a 1 day off out of the 5 days. 1 day is dedicated for their academics for each year, final year, second year residents. I think if there's a common understanding within the department, and if there's a consensus to give them 1 day for their academics, that would be much more easier. But if there is no understanding, then one consultant only pushing for ideas might be very difficult to implement.
No, that sounds fantastic, that you've kind of developing that culture in which trainees are given the freedom to pursue their academic studies, and balancing that against their clinical need. Sort of a question here I've got just about maybe different people sort of supporting this particular initiative and sort of simulation, because you've kind of alluded to the organizations that have supported VAST and other things. And this may be a question more for Dr. Fataya, if that's okay. Just following on from COVID, has the sort of Ethiopian government kind of had a realization that they should invest in their kind of local healthcare facilities? Because we've been the question asked sort of about is there government support for programs that are going on in Ethiopia, like GADP, and particularly financial support for simulation training?
So the question is there any support from the Ministry of Health?
Yes. Yeah.
That's a very tricky question to answer. Yes, there is a support, but to be honest, the Ministry of Health is mainly focused on anesthetists and non-physician anesthesia care provider rather than the anesthesiologists, because they feel like the majority of work is being delivered by the nurse anesthetists. So there were a lot of supports coming to Addis Ababa University and others, but usually it gets directed to the non-physicians because they do the bulk of work in the country. Like until recently, I think in 2014, the number of anesthesiologists in the country was 20. And out of the 20, only 9 were available within the country. But currently we have about 100 and more. So our number is increasing, and we're trying and we're struggling to have a voice. But to be honest, there is acceptance. Like, for instance, the high fidelity center that was done in Bahir Dar in Mekelle was actually through donation and collaboration from different universities. And whenever there's a teaching activity, there's a lot of work, but they would usually prefer it if it is for the non-anesthetists and the anesthesiologists.
Yeah, no, I can say that certainly resonates from my experience in Zambia as well. Okay, so a few questions have come in, so I'm just going to go to them as they came in order. So I'll go to Leslie's asked a question next, and it's again, sorry, Dr. Fataya, it's for you. SIM can be stressful and intimidating, and as Chris and Usman have mentioned, Ethiopian trainees seem good at hiding stress. What would your advice be as to how to avoid this and make Ethiopian trainees feel as comfortable and relaxed as possible?
Honestly speaking, even my experience in anesthesia was, undergrad. There is this hierarchical system in medical education in Ethiopia. So it's very difficult for any junior staff to talk to their senior consultants. But in anesthesia, we have a very different experience because our consultants used to talk to us like a colleague, and we were only 5 at the time. There was no residents in our department, so they were really looking forward to having anesthesia residents. So the experience we had was of that of us a colleague, not a hierarchical system. And so, during simulation, what I try to do is simulate that experience to the other residents, because, in other department, in undergrad, most people have a bad experience. If you are a senior, then you have to look up to them. And if you make mistakes, there's going to be consequences and things like that. So one of the things I did when I started simulation is I emphasized saying the simulation is not going to be considered as part of your progressive assessment. So initially, and even within the department, we had an agreement to give them a psychological safety. This is not going to be considered as part of their progressive assessment, but of course they have to be present, and not being present is going to be, will have consequences. But if once they are present, if they make mistakes and things like that, it's not going to be considered as part of their progressive assessment, which alleviated some of their anxieties. The second thing is, even I remember one resident suggested, who is a senior resident helping me co-facilitate, and he's like, "Doctor, I expected the simulation to be a little bit harsh, but you're a little bit too nice." And so he kind of felt like, he was expecting, because I'm a senior, to be like, hardcore and someone you cannot approach. So I think one of the things you could use is be approachable while you're in simulation, to make them be a little bit relaxed. And sometimes what I do is, at the end of the simulation, some of the residents who have anxiety, I would just stay behind and call them and talk to them and talk about why they feel anxious and if there's anything I could do to help them and things like that. And some of them might have family issue or, other issues unrelated to simulation that may have made them be the way they are. So having that kind of talk also might help them alleviate the anxiety. And Chris and Usman, any other suggestions?
Nothing to add to that, really.
Yeah, I think that was pretty comprehensive.
I think from a foreigner's perspective, it's just important to try to be as culturally aware as possible. And certainly, I think misreading, looking at the residents' faces as I give them the scenario outside the room, and that's quite an unfamiliar sight to me. Like I'm very used to how junior people in Britain will appear and how outwardly nervous we'll seem. And so I think just trying to get used to that and trying to pick up on the subtleties and not misunderstand a facial expression and think that you're understanding what somebody's feeling. I think it's really important just to try to get used to that as quickly as possible. Keep an open mind, I think, about how people are feeling and trying to give them the benefit of the doubt as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Jane S., you've got your hand up. Are you happy just to ask a question, I'm assuming? Or make a comment? I don't know, whichever.
Sorry, that was a mistake.
Okay.
Interesting presentations, everyone. It's fantastic to hear how everything is progressing in Ethiopia. It's really exciting stuff. So congratulations, great work.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I've got another question here in the Q&A from Dominic. And he wants to know, are specialties outside of anesthesia in Zambia or Ethiopia, well, Zambia and Ethiopia, using simulation for education, and how is that going? So Chris and Usman, if I come to you first, are there other specialties in Ethiopia using simulation for education?
I'm an intensive care dual trainee. So just for my own interest, I did spend some time, because the anesthesiologists go to surgical ITU and the medical doctors, they go to medical ITU in Black Lion Hospital. So I did talk to the medical intensive care doctors, the only example I can give, and they told me that they didn't have any kind of formal simulation teaching. So that's the only example I can think of. I haven't dived into the other specialties, but maybe Dr. Fethier might know more.
Are you still there? Yeah.
Dr. Fethier, are you aware of any other specialties using simulation at all in education and training?
So I just got posted to the simulation center, and I went there to have a look. And there were 2 programs that were run once a year, and it only occurred twice. And it's a multidisciplinary team between internal medicine and pediatrics. They have prepared a simulation template for their undergraduate students, so they actually give those simulations. Other than that, to be honest, the simulation center, even though its name says simulation center and it's supposed to be used for simulation, but most of the department uses it for other reasons rather than actually delivering simulation. And the vast training that was delivered in Addis actually included obstetricians and other nurses as well. And the Impact Africa also included obstetricians and pediatricians who said that they would go back and start doing simulations within their respective departments. But I don't think they have started yet. But the proper simulation, other than the Department of Anesthesiology, I don't think there is any being conducted in Black Lion Hospital.
I think it would be awesome to have some multi-professional sim, like involve the surgeons or the nurses or the midwives. But good luck to the person who's coordinating and organizing all of that.
Yeah, no, I'm aware that in Zambia there's been some work done by ZADP trying to do similar thing with multidisciplinary simulation, and I know they recently did some up in Ndola, and actually it when it kind of all came together, it worked really, really well. Sort of in situ multidisciplinary simulation is fantastic, and it worked well in Ndola when it was done there. I know we're going to hear from Chris and Joy later, but I know they do a lot of work with simulation and the nursing staff in University Teaching Hospital in Lusaka. So yeah, I'm aware there's other bits of simulation happening in Zambia as well, but it's certainly not as extensive as it is here in the UK, similar to, I think, the experience that you guys have there in Ethiopia as well. I've got one final little question that I just want to ask Dr. Fetia, if that's all right. I noticed that there was a banana being used for central line insertion, and I want to just know what's going on there. How does that exactly work? I might be using that, I feel.
I think at the time the ultrasound was not available, so they just wanted for the residents to understand the difference between different structures. For instance, when you go intravenous, there's a loss of resistance that you kind of feel, and I think they may have used it at the time, the banana. Usually we use the banana for epidural and spinals, right, because that's a very good thing for doing. But at that time they had a central line, and the residents were requesting for a central line, so they used it as an extra training for a central line. So I think it's just only for the loss of resistance. Otherwise, it would be very funny to use it in general as a means for training central lines. And unfortunately, we do have IV access place in the sim center, so we could use that.
Okay, great. No, thank you for that. Okay, so I think that's it for questions now. What we're going to do is thank you so much for your presentations, and it was really great to kind of hear what's been happening in Ethiopia, and it's exciting to see the work that you guys are doing. So congratulations and well done. Keep going.